Welcome, everyone, to our sixth session out of 8 of our study of the women of the Bible, or many of the women of the Bible, some of which we know well, some of which we are for the first time. And before we do introductions, before we sort of go around the room just so that everyone knows who's here, I'd like to open us with a prayer at the center. So please join me in the spirit. God, in this space, let us be seekers, let us be beginners, let us be open to the movement of your spirit, especially through stories we may know well. Help us to reach a deeper understanding of how these stories might be relevant to our lives. Help us to listen well to each other as we explore what the meaning may be. So that when we leave this room, these aren't just stories that touch our mind, but they really touch how we live and how we are in the world, that each one of us may be a deeper source of blessing for your sake. In Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, so let me start first by saying I'll mention the people online and then we'll go around the classroom. So joining us online, we have Ann Galbraith's chair. It's not in it, but I know that's her. We have Carol and Jay Williams. We have Marilyn Chambliss, Bertie Wiest, Boyce Baldwin, Cecily Dewing, and Stephen Pettit. So we've got eight or so folks joining online. And then if you could speak just your names going around the table so folks know.
Barbara Wallet, Honey Diagri, Marcia Port, Bonnie Magnetti, Jane Wurst,
Ken Moore,
Gary Edwards,
Kathleen Edwards.
All right, welcome one and all. So as we've been going through all these stories, we're hitting a lot, as I said, of different people we know and now or don't know. But in this week, we are in the book of Esther. And gosh, 4 years ago, some time ago, we covered the book of Esther, and it's just such a wonderful book. But it's got a lot of uniqueness to it. Who can tell me what's one of the most sort of fascinating things about the book of Esther? About some, if you can remember it. Maybe this is trivia, but I think it's quite fascinating. It's one of 2 books that don't contain this.
God.
Yes, Jane said it. God. There's no mention of God, even though there are references to spiritual practices like prayer and fasting. It is a book where God is hidden. Okay, and there's only one other book that has that same truth, and that is the Song of Songs. And so the Festival of Purim, which is in March, that is built off of this story. And one of the reasons that there's a whole dress-up component, almost like Halloween for Purim, and the reason for that is the Jews, since God was hidden in this book, hidden though present, they do dress up to sort of represent the way God was hidden. They sort of hide themselves. They wear masks and sort of things. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. But Purim is a recognition of the story of the book of Esther. And that story ultimately is about the saving, the preserving of the Jews as a culture, as a race, because there's a decree, an eradication decree that happens in the book of Esther. So with all that sort of as I guess somewhat of a backdrop, we're going to be talking about 2 central female characters today. One being Queen Vashti, who is only mentioned in the beginning portion of this book, and also Esther herself, the namesake of the book. Both of those characters, by the way, are not mentioned anywhere else in annals of history. So these stories, while incredibly powerful, are difficult to corroborate and kind of get an understanding of, how does this fit in the greater scheme of the context of the time. So in that case, we just spend less time worrying about the historicity of something and trying to understand, all right, what's the message? What's important here? And there's a lot that's important that's done, both in terms of the larger picture of a people and how they function in a world of difference, and multiculturalism, but also there's a lot of individual aspects that are lifted up here that we'll see. So as we get started in this book, what we learn quickly is that the Persians, because this is happening in the time of the Persian Empire when the second exile happens, the Persians are masters of partying. I don't know, listen, when we have a blowout party, it might go, what, into the night, maybe to the next morning. This guy, King Ahasuerus, has a 180-day party. Now, I can't even imagine, like, that's not even a party, that's just work. But the point of the story is, maybe that's not so much about the literal days of the party, and just to say this is over the top extravagance, just over the top, almost incomprehensible. So you've got this, welcome Joe, and you've got this amazing party that's set up, and the king is just feasting and drinking a lot. And they're all having, the men are having this massive party, and at the same time, Queen Vashti is doing her own party with the women of Susa, the town of Susa, and the city of Susa. And it's a big party itself, okay? And at some point, I think it says 7 days in or something, King Ahasuerus, in a drunken stupor, calls for his wife to be paraded around, so that his friends can gawk at her, basically. What does she say?
No, not coming.
Yeah. At a great personal risk, she stands up. She says, no.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about that is it's a foreshadowing of the very courage that Esther embodies, because what did she, well, we'll get into that. I don't want to go too much into sort of analyzing it, but she stands up and she says, no. If you say no to a king, you'd be a little further, and they're like, all right, what do we do about this? Because she's just basically put you to shame, and we can't let that stand. So they make a decision, okay, with what to do with her. And what they decide is to cast her out. Not to, but to, okay? So they had to do something. So anyway, she stands up for herself. She stands up and stands against what she feels to be an unrealistic, unjust, just a terrible request. Okay, so there's Queen Vashti. Esther. Esther is someone who, if you all have watched The Shawshank Redemption, which I hope you have, because if you haven't, then I'm almost ready to say, stop Bible study right now and go watch it. But I won't say that. But at the end of Shawshank, there's a scene where Andy Dufresne, the character, is climbing through a 500-yard, tunnel full of excrement, sewer. Okay, and he's climbing, and he's getting to where he needs to go. He's going from prison, and he's going to freedom. If anyone understands what that journey is like, Esther is one. Esther is one. Her parents died at a young age. She was adopted by her uncle. I believe it was her uncle Mordecai, who was one of the protagonists of the story. She goes through the ringer in her early life, and then she's part of this beauty pageant to get selected to be the next queen after Vashti is kicked out. She's not prepared for this. She's just sort of there, and she, of course, wins and is put in this elevated position within the court. She's got all this new responsibility. She's got all these different things to do, okay? And there comes this time when there's this plot against the king that is thwarted by Mordecai. And it's a plot by two eunuchs, and they decide to take care of those eunuchs. And by take care of, I don't mean kick out, I mean. So what happens after that, though, is there's this evil guy named Haman who understands that he is wanting more power, more prestige, more position in the court. And so he comes up with this plot to convince the king, it wasn't just about those two eunuchs. You got a problem with an entire race here. Now, this is really scary because we've seen this play out. We're continuing to see it play out. It's a story of sort of the eradication of a race, of genocide, basically, of intention to genocide. And so Mordecai sees this edict from the king, or understands it, and is totally at a loss because he's not in a position to do anything, but there's one person who is, because she's the queen, and that's Esther. And she's Jewish. So, and I probably didn't say that, but that's a part of the story too. But so she's in this position, and he's like, listen, don't think for a second, and we're going to read this. You're not protected. I don't want to I don't want to force you in this position, but maybe you got here for such a time as this. It's just such a powerful line that we know, right? That whole idea. And she comes up, and she's, it's a weighty thing. And she kind of goes through this process of coming to terms with doing the right thing, basically, standing up for her people while putting herself at risk. And we see what comes of that. because of her willingness to do that, the Jews, it both lifts the eradication decree, but a lot of people don't hear about it. So it enables the Jews to defend themselves from the armies that are already out and dispersed and trying to slaughter. So it allows the preservation of the Jewish people because of her risk, because of her willingness to be a hero. Both of them stand up like this. Both Esther and Queen Vashti stand up for what's right. And so our job today is to look at that a little bit and to see how both on maybe a personal and a larger level, their faith, their actions, how they inspire us, how they connect to us, how they challenge us, and what we are to learn from what their actions are. So that's our intention for today. Do we have any comments or questions about these two or about stuff that's remained from previous weeks?
But Haman and the king did not know Esther was Jewish.
They didn't know she was. They knew Mordecai was, and that was part of the risk. Is that Esther revealing herself was going to reveal that she's Jewish and married to, so it just was on multiple levels a real risk for her to do this. Exactly. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so as far as doing the readings, we'll read both of the, we'll read the first one about Queen Vashti, and that's in Esther chapter 1, verses 1 to 12. Now, I don't know if your translation does this, but mine has a section called preliminaries, which kind of takes some texts from later in the book and puts them in the front because they pertain to sort of setting the stage for the story. So if yours does that, that's all it's trying to do. It's taking stuff that appeared at the end and showing how it fits better in terms of the story at the beginning. Maybe yours doesn't do that. Mine has two sections prior to chapter 1 that kind of gives some context, has to do with a dream that Mordecai has. But regardless, we're going to read chapter 1, verses 1 to 12. Since that's the shorter of the two readings, could I offer that to someone online to do or to share? If we did, I think because it's still a little long, let's do someone read 1 to 6, and then the next person reads 7 to 12. Can we do it that way? So who's up for reading? Carol, that's one. Okay, can you do Esther 1 to 6, and then who would like to take the next section of it? Thank you, Cecily. Eager. I know, eager. That's early, you know. Because they're like, no, I read. I can't drink my coffee. Anyway. So anyway, would you please get us started, Carol?
Queen Vashti deposed. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fashioned with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones.
Holy, thank you.
I know.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman, Biztha, Arbona, Bigtha, Babakta, Zetar, and Karsus, to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger.
That's it. Okay. Carol, real quick, which translation were you reading from?
Let's see. New International.
Okay, so the NIV. All right.
Yeah.
And don't get
It's a study Bible.
Xerxes and Ahasuerus are kind of linked. One is the Persian name, one is more the Greek, kind of the Hebrew name, but they're the same. They're identified as the same king. And ultimately, the extravagance described is what we hold on to here. Okay. And just for context, if you've ever attended a party at like Perry and Kathleen's house, it's exactly like this.
The water flows freely.
Okay, so there's so much more that's said about his response to Vashti, but just the fact that it's his enraged response is what it's going to do. And so just, how might this have worked out differently for Vashti? I think we can all guess, but just to go ahead and put it out there, how would you expect things to go? You would expect him to basically not even waste any time. Obviously in a relationship with someone he loves, that kind of thing, but he at the very least cast her out. So that was sort of a generous response in some ways. But she put herself, this is not just like, I'm gonna dare to stand up and risk a slap on the wrist. She was risking her life and knowingly doing so. That's the key. To know that you're standing up when you defy the king in anything. It doesn't matter who you are. You're ruining his authority, or you're threatening his authority. And so you risk your life when you do that. And now I want to also ask you this. He's had this feast for a ton of days in the court, and then a 7-day feast here in Jerusalem. And there's this point of contention when he asks Vashti to come in wearing the crown. Some scholars, based on the way it's written, suggest that it could be that he wants to be sure that when she comes parading in, she's wearing the crown. But many others suggest that what King Ahasuerus is asking is that she comes wearing only the crown. And yeah, that makes a big difference. Now, it may or may not matter to the story because his drunkenness, his attitude, it sort of gets conveyed in both situations. But it just begs the question. She responded how she responded. How would you have responded if your spouse had asked you to do something like that? And you can go both ways. It doesn't just need to be women responding to men, but how would you respond? What would go through, not just the fact that you would say, no, thank you, but what would be going through your mind if someone you loved made a request like that?
Yeah, what's wrong with him?
Bonnie,
Why would he?
what's wrong with you? Is it? Yeah.
Oh, he's
Okay.
really drunk.
Okay, yeah. So, would you leave it at that? Do you think in your mind, to the best of your knowledge or to your understanding, would you say, he's just drunk?
No, I get really angry.
Yeah. So it's like he's drunk and who is this guy?
How dare he?
Kind of questioning what are the roots of this relationship?
It might be the final straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, I sort of like, it's led up to this, and now she says, this is too far.
Yeah.
Who
in a
knows?
culture where women don't speak out and stand up like
Yeah.
this, that's what's so significant about what Vashti does. Jane and if anyone has, yeah.
Well, yeah, I would probably agree that he probably had put her on the spot other times and disrespected her in certain ways of wanting her to flaunt her beauty in his own arrogance, you know? And it's very disrespectful, and it would probably be the last straw. She finally just said, forget this. I've done this over and over, and I'm disgusted with you
Well,
and your
That is what
gross
she does.
man,
We
you
don't
know?
know if there's other instances, but it is definitely a last straw kind of response. That she's just like, no, enough's enough. Because again, she knows that to say that is going to create some sort of response, whether it's her own death or some sort of expulsion. Like she just knows that is a given. And for all the reasons that the story says afterwards, you know, you can't just let it happen, because then every wife is going to stand up and not listen to their husband,
Yeah.
the ruler of the house. This is kind of the attitude of the day.
Yeah.
And this is the attitude of our day still. There are still leaders within churches and within politics who stand up preaching that kind of understanding of leadership within household. It's just still there. So this is a big deal, what she stands up against, you know, and the faith that she exhibits by doing that, you know, the trust, or just that she's fed up, but she speaks truth, or she stands up for the sake of truth. Okay, fine.
It doesn't, it's like she's his trophy wife, and it doesn't
Yes.
show any concern for her or her feelings or anything else about her except her looks.
That's right. It's incredibly shallow. It just basically, it belittles her, and it kind of just, she is just a thing to be beheld. Yeah.
But I think, you know, we're looking at it in today's where we're allowed to have feelings. Even my parents' generation, it wasn't a feeling. It was, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for that. And so we've come into this, well, that hurt. Let's talk about it.
Right.
But back then, or even, you know, like I said, not too long ago, it's not a matter of feelings. It's, you're responsible to do as I say.
Right, right. And so these stories, and Marcia's exactly right. We tend to look at these, and it's easy for us to try to psychologize them. But the stories rarely, if ever, give us any psychology, any motivation. Here's why this person did this. But we just know that they did it. And she stood up for truth and for herself in a culture that never would have afforded her that luxury, at least without consequence. There was no freedom there. There was a certain consequence that she knew she was stepping into. And that's what's so powerful, you know. Boys.
Yeah, it seems to me that here he has set up this extravagant party for everyone, you know, the commoners and the royals and everything.
Yes.
And to me, it seems like he considered it a slap in his face when she then has another party for all the women in his palace. And so it seems like maybe that was the first slap in his face. And so he wanted to get back at her and parade her around, whether if she was nude or just coming out, it would show he's still in charge. But then when she denies it, that's another slap in his face. So
No,
I see kind of two slaps in the face. It didn't make sense to me. Why is she throwing a party for women when he's throwing this great, big, huge party? And how would that make him feel? She's not part of the party, his party.
Right. That may well be. I don't remember. I don't think it was sort of unheard of that such a party would happen, because men and women in these types of situations would often be separated. So, but what you bring up is it's feasible, and it sort of plays well. The point is, the king perceived a slap in the face one way or another, maybe multiple. And her response to him was a threat to his authority, and it needed to be responded to. And so right at the outset of this story, we see a woman standing up for herself and facing dire consequences. Now, not the most dire, she at least preserved her life, but she was willing to stand up and put it all on the line for the sake of her dignity, her worth, her self-esteem. Yes.
She was showing other women how to despise their husbands too.
That's it. Well, here's the thing. Barbara brings up a really good point. She was showing other women, and you use the word despise. And it's true. So the men of the story perceive what she did as, oh, she's showing other women how to despise their men and question their authority. Whereas we and other people, maybe the women of the story, would see she's showing other women how to stand up for themselves, for what is right. Because that's the story. The story shows us that what she did was right, and it's a precursor to what Esther is about to do. The whole story is about women standing up for what is right and saving the day in a world that always bequeaths that to men and says, oh, this is the territory of men to do this kind of thing. Well, no, this story is about quite the opposite. But it's interesting how, you know, depending on your perspective, both of those are true. And within the story, the men and the men of leadership certainly saw what she did as a slap in the face and teaching other women to do that. Jane and then Bonnie.
Well, the idea of the two separate parties, the men's party, the women's party, and then the male authority. And I mean, there are religions that have been based on the women did not worship in the same meeting hall as the men. They didn't get the same preachers. They didn't get the same opportunities within religions around the world, even in the United States. And then, and of course, a lot of other areas as well, whether it's home, business,
Yes.
churches, whatever,
Yes.
that the men had the roles of the most power and the women were relegated to the second room and the other
Yes.
jobs and the other.
The truth
And
is,
so we've been doing this, trying to stand up for probably centuries, women like this, seeing the way things were and saying, wait a minute. And it's happened over and over again in history, women just trying to have a place at the table, you know?
to have a voice that's heard and respected.
Yeah.
And it's only been in our lifetime that we finally come to accept across, in a general way, women in leadership positions. When you think about it, especially within churches, but it's, as Jane said, it's true in business, it's true in our homes, our churches, our government, that it's only been in the last, what? Really? Okay, we've had examples of people like Eleanor Roosevelt, who had a prominent position, incredible leader, but that wasn't the same, was it? That's like a one-off. And we I think, easily can fall into the trap of saying, but look at this one example. See, things weren't as, no, we can't do that. I think we could all remember in our own lives the first time that we had a woman pastor in a church and what that was like. I remember it was 1984. Deborah Adams Christensen, who I love, she was the associate pastor. She was the first woman pastor at the church in New Hampshire, Nashville, New Hampshire, where I grew up in. And she got so much flack. And you know what it was about? Her hair, the way she dressed, the way she looked. Theology was after all that stuff. You see, it's the same pattern, isn't it? It's the same thing. And then you look at our households. Think about in your lives, maybe not in your immediate family, but we all know people in our circles of family and friends that have a much different idea of what it means to have sort of a household and who's in charge of a household and how those power dynamics play out. We've become, in general, a little more even, but there are still many, many circles, many, many practices, and espoused by many, many churches that profess a much different dynamic, a hierarchy, and often male-dominated hierarchy. We still see this. And so it needs to be named. And also, we need to appreciate that it still takes courage for women to stand up and speak in the ways that Jane has mentioned, and others have mentioned too. Ken?
Another way to look at this is that Vashti created an international crisis because there wasn't just the folks from his kingdom,
Yeah.
but the neighboring militaries. And so he had to demonstrate strength.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And again, if you read the next few verses, it kind of goes into that, what Ken just described, that this is just not something that can be left to stand. But the power of it, what is so beautiful about this story is like she did it. She stood up in the face of all that. Yes, international, take it to the next level. It just, you can ratchet up the tension of the story, what she has done by standing up. But in the end, she did what was right, and she stood up for herself. And she paid a price, but she got to live. So it's just one of those, it's again, a foreshadowing in a lot of ways of what exactly we'll see with Esther. But it was a big deal. And it illustrates the dynamics within that society that were at play, but also being questioned. Because Vashti, in the context of this story, is a hero. Okay, she's a hero in this story. One of the heroes of the Jewish people. Again, her actions kind of link to Esther, whose actions saved the Jewish people. So again, it's almost like this story serves as a precursor to what we have come to know as women's liberation. Okay, that's a big stretch, but it's like this is how things work. And this story itself is an illustration of maybe the fact that maybe the way we set up our culture and our societies isn't just to stand for all time. Maybe there's another way, or there are other ways. That's part of what's being brought up here. You know, all of this stuff is suffused into this one story. Anyone online? I don't want to miss any hands if people have any questions or comments. Marilyn.
Well, I'll make it fast, but I would like to tell about a personal experience because it relates so to this. When I was in my early 50s and brand new PhD, a job became available at the University of Maryland, and I was a Californian. And I wanted to apply. It just looked like a wonderful job. And I thought what fun it would be to live across the country like that and so close to Washington. I wouldn't feel that way today, but I did then. And so I started talking to people about applying and asking if they write letters of recommendation and things, different faculty. And every single person I asked said, Marilyn, I mean, go ahead and do this, but there isn't any way they're going to offer you the job. You know, not only are you female, but you're old. And I thought, okay, so I heard this, but I wasn't going to listen. I was going to try. And I did try, and I was offered the job. And when I moved back there, they told me I was their #1 choice. So it wasn't even that somehow they couldn't get anybody else to come, so they asked me. And I had a wonderful 13 years there. It worked out very, very well. But that idea of persistence, that's not captured here quite as much, except that she had the courage to do it. And I feel like I had the courage to do it.
And that's a wonderful connection. Thank you, because she leaned into the prevailing winds and the voices around her, or she understood what those were, because the story has them all over the place. And yet she still stood up. So there's a definite connection. She still stood up. That's a lot of S's. But she did what was right for her, not listening to the voices of culture or society that would have been pressing against her. And that's a powerful choice. Carrie.
From a family perspective, my family, I have an aunt, great aunt, got a master's degree from MIT in chemistry in the early 1930s.
Wow.
Not chemistry education, chemistry.
Wow.
She went to apply for a job at Berkeley High School, and she was the one that they selected. We have her hire letter from the school, and it says, we're hiring you, but if a man applies for this job, we will take back our hire.
Oh my God.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
We treasure that. We treasure that.
History
Yeah.
illustrates what we're talking about.
Exactly.
She then taught there for 40 years and never missed a day.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hope everyone heard that online. What a powerful share. Thank you. Did everyone hear what Mary shared? Yeah.
She was private pilot, travel.
And here's the thing, these examples that you shared in
And
the
a congregation.
are in your own lives, okay. We are all asked to take stands at different times, you know, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in church, whether it's out in the world. Can you think of what has been the motivator? If you've ever taken a stand, what's been that sort of last straw that led you to do what Queen Vashti did and stand up just for what is right and not even worrying about what the consequences are? Can you think of something? And again, it could be in your personal life, and anything that's shared, please know that it is only shared in this room and with all the people online who will watch this afterwards. But to not to be overly light about it, but just what is it that you can think of that led you to take a stand for something? What comes up? What has been that thing? Could be an issue, could be a cause, could be a personal revelation, a sense of clarity, of wanting to free yourself from something, of stepping out of fear. What is it? What comes up when you think about when you have taken a stand, and what was it that motivated that? What pushed you? Carol.
The Blue Star Moms every year would have a fundraiser at Laughs Unlimited in Old Town Sacramento. And I went online because I'd never been there. And I couldn't believe the filth of those comedians. And I was in charge of that event. And I told them, you'll have to find somebody else. I can't, in good conscience, promote an event that I won't do it. And everybody said, you know, we've noticed over the last couple years, and we've been uncomfortable. So we totally agree. And I thought, whoa, because I expected them to say, well, you know, we do this every year. Yeah. So they actually went and talked to the owner of the theater and said, you know, we're going to have to withdraw this year. And he said, no, I'll talk to the comedians and we'll lighten it up. Well, during the event, one of the comedians said, well, you know, I understand you're a bunch of moms out there, so I got to clean things up. And we all applauded. I mean, yes. It was great. And, you know, it was just as funny. And I think Eddie Murray is one of those. He can be just as funny without using the F word all the time.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy. Absolutely. What a beautiful example of just standing up when others, it sounds like they kind of wanted to, but it was your voice that was that sort of precipitator. You were the straw. Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other examples from your life? Cecily.
I'll share a personal story. This year, I stopped cooking for my husband. We've been married 23 years, and he has a profound hearing loss. And so for all of our time together, I've had to sort of be his interpreter in social settings and be extra patient with him because of his hearing loss. And I was born in 1960, and my mom, she went to work when I was a young child as a social worker. And I remember at that time, it was kind of unusual for a wife to go out and work. Anyway, I remember my father always complaining that my mom wasn't available always to cook dinner for him. So when I got married, cooking dinner was important. You know, I wanted to provide for my husband. So for 23 years, actually more, I would cook lunch and dinner for my husband. But there was one day when he was, after years of kind of this profound hearing loss affecting his communication and our communication, and feeling not feeling heard and disrespected, there was one day where it kind of was pretty bad, and he wouldn't let me speak. And so I said, you know, I'm not going to cook for you anymore. And that was a huge stand for me, because I grew up thinking I have to cook, but I matter.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes, yeah, we gotta make those stands, and that's out of love. It's out of love for yourself, you know? And I hope that that teaches, you know, him in the context of your relationship, but in the end, at the end, you can't control that. You did what you needed to do, and that's what's beautiful and powerful about that. And that's a huge thing. I think a lot of us who, you know, across ages have an understanding that to provide food, be it cooked by the wife or the husband or whatever, you know, that the person that does that, that's sort of an essential role. That's that it needs to happen kind of thing. We often assign that to one person. And if that changes, that is a significant shift in the dynamics of the relationship. And in this case, it was you standing up for yourself. And, you know, the consequences or not, well, I guess consequences, but just the way that that plays out is unfolding. Because you said it was just within the last year or so, or months, or it's a pretty recent.
This last year. And I should also note, when I graduated high school early. And so when I was a teenager, I began college and my chosen career was fire science. I wanted to be a firefighter, which at that time was also unusual. And I was the first, often only woman in my classes. And then I had a child out of wedlock. I was molested by my godfather. So I couldn't pursue that career. But later on in life, I pursued engineering and became an engineer. And I was also the only woman often in my classes. And so I grew up with a mom who was very liberated. And I pursued careers where I wanted to help people, but they happened to be careers that were often men were involved, but I followed my heart with what I wanted to do. But when it came to my marriage, I still had it ingrained on me that, you know, a woman shows love by providing and cooking. So when I was able to take that stance and say I matter, it was huge for me.
What a teacher you are for all of us. Thank you, Cecily.
Thank you. And I want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. But here at the church at First Congregational, I've been so pleased and blessed. Again, I went into Board of Buildings and Grounds and Brats. And those are two groups that are mostly male dominated, but they've been so welcoming and trusting of me to be part of those two groups as well.
It is gratifying to hear that, because I know that it hasn't always been that way when we've had various mixes of men and women on certain boards and in areas. But I'm pleased to hear that for sure in this instance. Boyce.
Yeah, when I was younger, I made a very unpopular decision. And to this day, in many eyes, it's very unpopular. And when I was late teenager and in my 20s, I would go on marches against war and against all the stuff that was going on in Vietnam and etc. But I decided when the draft came along and you had to register, I registered as a conscientious objector.
Wow.
Because I could not see myself and I didn't believe that war was the way to solve problems. And that was very, very unpopular. I've had numerous visits to the draft board where they would drill me and try to figure out, they thought I was a draft dodger, trying to do it kind of legally. And so they really drilled my conscience, my values, etc. And then I received all kinds of phone calls from recruiters recruiting me, Navy, Marine, that you name it. They were calling me constantly. And of course, they had words like chicken and yellow and all those kinds of words being called to me. And I had a hard time with my friends to admit that, because I didn't want to lose them as friends.
Yeah.
And even today, if somebody finds out, well, I lost a job because my stand, and I don't know how the person found out, but they did, and they convinced the committee to not hire me, even though I was #1 on their list to be. It was a personnel director of personnel in an organization. Anyway, but that was a difficult decision for an 18-year-old. But I'm glad I made it, because I just couldn't see myself participating in something and that I didn't believe in. And so I chose to serve my country in a way. And it was interesting because I went into education. I was a teacher, and I thought, I'm serving my country, but the draft board didn't think that. So they in fact, in their manual, it says that you have the opportunity to do other jobs that interrupts your life, like somebody going into the military. And that was their main goal. They didn't care what you did, but it had to interrupt your life. And so anyway, for 2 years, I spent interrupting my life, and then went back into education. But that decision, and still, I'm hesitant to mention that, because I know there are a lot of people that have see that as not courageous. They don't see it as, they see it as being a coward. And of course, our government rewards those who have served in military activities, but they don't reward anybody who's been in the Peace Corps or anything that is peaceful. And I still question, why do we have a War Department and don't have a Peace Department if we're such a peaceful country? We have all kinds of generals and everything.
Lots to think about. And when I'm hearing this, I'm sure a lot of folks, who grew up in that generation can resonate with at least the tension of what you're talking about. But when I hear it, and it seems like you named it this way, your whole motivation for what you gave your life to was sort of born out of that decision. And serving the youth of America, serving this country, at being a teacher, is such a powerful motivation to say, I want to create something that's different and life-giving, and to try to build something in a time when everything was falling apart, in the late 60s, early 70s. So that seems like, yeah, there was some serious consequences to the stand you took, but it also led to some pretty clear paths that you got to take in your life. And that's what these decision moments, these stand moments often do for us. They are at once risk, they put us at odds with culture, with friends, with family, and yet they establish the path and the pattern that is for the rest of our lives, that it matters to take stands like this. So as we think of all of our stands, that come up when you dare to think, what were these moments in my life? That's what's at stake often, is that it changes the trajectory of our lives. And that is often a good thing, or at least it's a powerful thing, because it gives us purpose. It gives us clarity in these moments when it could have, gone multiple, different ways.
I forgot to mention that I finally got drafted. And I believe the age of 26 was the age that you didn't get drafted anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I was drafted about 6 months after I was 26.
Oh.
So they wanted me. They didn't want me where, they didn't want me where they wanted me, but they wanted me to have that opportunity to interrupt my life for two.
Yes, interrupt, right. So, thank you, boys. Thank you. Let's move into the next portion of the next person, also within the book of Esther. I know that it's almost 10 till 10. It is 10 till 10 right now. Let's see, if you need to drop off, I understand people's time. But could we have 2 volunteers in the room here to read chapter 4, verses 1 to 17? Let's do the first, oh gosh, let's do the first 8 verses, and then 9 through 17. We'll get 2 volunteers. Bonnie will start, and not all at once. Marcia, okay, thank you. Chapter 4.
1 through 8.
You're reading 1 through
Okay.
8, yeah, and then Marcia's 9 through 17.
Okay. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hattach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hattach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. And Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. And they related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Oh,
Last
keep going. Oh.
17.
Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will fast in the same way, and thus I will go to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him.
I always get a chill when I hear that story. It's just so beautiful. And I love that energy, the whole for such a time as this. And I also love the way he says, if you choose to not stand up when the time is calling you, liberation is going to come from another quarter, and you will die you know, and it kind of, but it reminds me of, for all its warts, you know, the movie Braveheart, when William Wallace says, you know, every man dies, but not every man truly lives, that whole idea, and it's a bigger speech than that, and yeah, all the different things around it, but it brings up just that element of, you know, it's there in front of us, and sometimes we hold on to acting in ways that are safe and want to preserve every little thing. And it's not always life or death, but we act in terms of safety so many more times than out of courage. And this is where Esther's story kind of invites us to be. What is it in our lives that keeps us from acting with that kind of courage? Why do we tend to be act like this, more safe? What is it? When we have faith, we're told God can move mountains. We're told God is going to be a powerful force. Maybe not doing it all for us, but that it's real. So why is it that we find ourselves struggling to be courageous so many times? What is it? What creates in each one of us a tendency to resist standing up when the time calls? What is it for you that creates that resistance inside of you? And I know it's not only resistance. I know we all stand up, but I want to start with that. What creates that inner, I don't know, pullback from the times of standing? Jane.
Well, for me, I know God is going to be with me. It is, I don't question that God will be with me through being, you know, being courageous in some way. But the risk I take, I do have to know that I have no control of the outcome. And I don't believe God's going to zap it just because I trust him and make it the outcome I want. I've come to really embrace the idea that God is with me. His presence will give me strength and courage and hopefully wisdom and clarity, all those things. But the outcome is the risk that I have to be prepared to face anyway.
Yes.
And so that's what I've dealt with as an adult, as a more of a grown woman adult in my last 10, 20 years, you know.
And I think Jane's naming something that a lot of us understand, at least intuitively, and that is that faith may embolden us, but it does not protect us. It cannot protect us, like ultimately, every time.
No.
Even for Jesus.
Yeah.
Look at the way the prayer of Jesus is. Please, God, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will.
Yeah.
In the end, you know, recognizing that there's no protecting us from the consequences or from being hurt in this life. Faith emboldens us. But that's the rub, isn't it? And it's whether or not we decide to take that leap. And a lot of times what we've named in the last example is we take the leap when we're just pushed and we're not always thinking about the consequences. You know, the whole look before you leap thing. No, we usually just oftentimes take the leap for the sake of courage or the sake of what's right, because we're just pushed to that limit. And then all of a sudden, while we're dealing with consequences, we don't always get to think of those first. And in some ways, maybe that's what courage is. Courage isn't about assessing every detail and making a measured choice. Courage by its nature is accepting that it's not going to be a perfect decision, but what's right is right. And you jump into it without knowing. You know, that's courage. Because otherwise, even Esther's story, she could have said, you know what, let's fast for a few days. Actually, let's fast for a while, because I really need to assess all I need to do a risk analysis here of what the possible outcomes could be. And then I'll make the best choice according to the analytics. You know, that's not life, right? But we all deal with that tension, I think, of being emboldened and inspired by our faith, and yet life and suffering and pain are real, even in the midst of that, because that's what happens. That's why we have martyrs. That's why our prophets get killed, because the world doesn't like when people stand up for what's right a lot, you know, and so that is the risk. Any other comments about that? It's a challenge, you know, and we pray for the faith and the courage of an Esther in the moment. And what I'm hearing is that you all have examples in your lives when you have stood up and put yourself at risk. Not necessarily It's not always life and death, but it need not be. But it could be reputation. It could be, standing in your family or your circle of friends. That's meaningful stuff. That creates isolation. That changes the trajectory of our lives and our relationships at times. Marilyn, I see you. Go ahead.
Yes, I often wonder if I'm right. And that can happen to me a lot of the time. I can say something, and there's a little voice inside that says, wonder if I'm right.
Right.
But I certainly, that was holding me back with the move to Maryland that I described. And it began to just feel right. And I think often that works for me better than trying to reason it out.
I think one of the best trajectories or the best tacts we can have is to constantly question, or to at least leave the door open that I may not be right.
Mm-hmm.
I still act, I still make bold choices, but to be able to say that, to me, it allows you not to get entrenched and stuck in a particular position, and that we all act with the best of our knowledge and our information at the time. And yet there's going to be times when we're not right, when we're wrong, okay? And that's all right. Because what I see in my life, and I see it in the lives of many that I deal with, is that a lot of us make choices most of the time in our lives out of fear of being wrong. And so we're holding back. We're not taking leaps because we're afraid of being wrong. When what Marilyn described was quite a different approach. She took the leap, or she will risk saying something or engaging something and then recognize, I may not be right, but I'm going to tell you how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful, I think it's a powerful way of living, because it sort of illustrates and embodies something along the lines of what Cicely was talking about. It embodies that we matter, that what we say has import, not over and against you. See, it still has that humility, but too many of us, I think we approach our lives, I do this too, out of fear of being wrong, or out of not wanting to be wrong or hurt someone or do that. We hold back because we worry about that stuff more than taking the stand, and then dealing with it, We're sort of we often get caught up in wanting the permission to do something. And instead of how we often say, easier to ask for forgiveness after I do this or say this. You know what I mean? That's actually not a bad way to be. That's what our faith teaches us. Forgiveness is real. Forgiveness is empowering, not only to let go of what's happened, but I think to free you into making choices that are bold.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or thoughts about it? How was Esther blessed when through the power of God she faced her fears? How did it end up blessing her? Because she put her life on the line.
Her people were saved.
Her people were saved. They weren't perfectly saved. A lot of them still got slaughtered because they were at war. But they were given word, they were allowed to defend themselves, and ultimately, because of her risk of life and limb, her people were saved. That's the story of Esther.
Well, in her relationship with her husband, the king, that he was willing to hold up the gold scepter and even listen to her.
Yes.
And that he kept listening to her, it sounded like, in terms of, she'd say, well, all the if you read on,
Yes,
and,
yes.
and that he did listen, and he did wait for the time period that she said, we're going to go and have some sort of, I don't know, feast together, the fasting and all that. The fasting, but he followed her pace in it, and then,
and in a sense, James bringing up something that's a little bit underneath the surface of this story, and that is that in his own way, King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, was willing to kind of take a stand too, because he wasn't just blindly following what Haman convinced him to do. I mean, he made the edict, But then by listening, by reconsidering, he's demonstrating an openness that is not part of what he's shown us so far. He has been a rigid, black and white kind of person, you know, that is kind of, seems to be all about his own display of power, when in this instance, he seems convinced by something deeper, something true. So it just, there's that dynamic that's happening. How else was Esther blessed by her, by God as she faced her fear? I sense like between her and Mordecai, there's something that's just this shared. They both have this sense of the enormity of this. He knows what it means. She knows what it means. And there's this shared bond that I think comes when we exist in the space of the stuff that's important. You know those friends that you have that you just, when you're with them, you talk about the stuff that matters, the deep stuff. There's something about that bond. It's not to say that the friends that we just have sort of cursory and coffee talk and, kind of gossip stuff, that's beautiful too, but it's just different. And sometimes when we have those bonds with those people, it gives us like a power or a permission to kind of be a little bit bigger in the way we live, or to make different choices, to not just stay shallow and safe. I don't know if I'm describing it as well as I wish, but there's just certain circles, there's certain relationships that we have that can nudge us in the direction of living larger. And we need to cherish those. And it was forged in a really tough situation. Yes, it's her uncle, but it's more than that. There's a deep bond. So I feel that in some ways she was blessed with having that type of a relationship of someone who knew that struggle, because he was part of it. He was in it as a known Jew. He would have been facing extermination, and to find that within that tough context is often what allows us to make the difficult choices. If Martin Luther King hadn't had his wife in that moment when he was at the table late at night saying, "I can't do this anymore, I'm done," and his heart told us, after he died, his heart was like 2 decades older, worn out because of what he was bearing. But he was enabled to do it because of the small circle, primarily his wife, that helped him to say, let's carry on. One more day or whatever, that kind of thing. It's really, really powerful. Marcia.
So I'm not getting the total the idea of the Jews.
Okay.
If this had turned the other way,
yeah,
would have it annihilated the Jews?
Well, I don't know about it like for all time. In that kingdom, the edict was within the kingdom.
So there were other
Persia.
Jews in other areas.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just
because they didn't take all the Jews when they brought them into exile in Babylon and in Persia. They took the ones that had something to offer. The teachers, the artisans, the merchants. They took those. They left the people of the land there. Just like, the lower educated ones.
Yep.
They wanted the best of the best. That's how it works. So yeah, there was still a scattering of Jews across multiple places. But within the kingdom of Persia at that time, it would have been an eradication or an attempted eradication. Birdie.
I think Esther was also blessed with wisdom to know that fasting would be helpful. It helps bring God into the situation. And
Absolutely. It was like a collective choice when she did that. The way she had said, I'm inviting all of them in. It made it a sacred decision and a shared one in some ways. Yes, it was her burden, but she was sharing it at that moment. And there's something about that. And taking the time to allow it to matter. And by not eating, some of what fasting does is it removes the distractions. It's a purifier, isn't it? If any of you have raise your hand if you've ever practiced fasting, say for more than a day. Okay, Ken has, Marcia has. It's not easy. And it's hard at times to focus on anything else other than that next bite of food or cheating. Say, well, I could just have one cracker, that would help. At least my stomach would stop gurgling and I could start. But then there's a point where it does, you get this deep focus. And you're allowed to sort of see things, I think, with greater clarity, because it's kind of pushing aside some of the distractions, food being and what we consume, you know, being this kind of cycle all the time. It breaks that cycle. It's kind of like what Boyce was saying. It's that interruption to our life that allows something else to break in. She's inviting that. So that to me is part of her. There's a wisdom there. There's kind of a prayerful sort of spiritual component there that she invites all to participate in, that allows the decision to become greater connected to God. But what that amounts to. It wasn't a hasty decision in that way. Each of us is asked to allow God to inspire us to take stands in our lives. And each of us has. But each of us also knows those times in our lives where we've held back, often because of fear or wanting to maintain relationship with people or a person. None of these are bad reasons, okay? But what they do is often in hindsight, they're not our best reasons always, that they don't lead us down a path of deeper richness or truth or power. That they end up, if we make choices based on preserving relationship or safety, it doesn't always lead us to being available for such a time as this moment. You know, and the words of Mordecai, I think, are true. That if we choose to step back, that's our choice. And we will perish one way or another, we all do. But how do we want to live? How is it that we want to be remembered? Not just by history, but by our progeny. What are we teaching, you know, by how we act and when we step forward and when we stand up? And how we speak. We don't need to worry about being perfect, but to allow ourselves to be motivated by a deeper faith and a clarity like that, I think there's something there. And when I read these stories about these two women, there's clarity there. And they stand up and they don't consider all the risks, but they act with God. They act in faith. And it leads them to this place of real, just incredible power and blessing. And they make a difference in their world. You know, Vashti was just as much a part of this. Again, the story sort of sets her up as the precursor to Esther. You know, she sort of showed the way. Here's how you stand up for what's right. We all have people in our lives. We all have women in our lives who showed us how to do that. A course like this invites us to call them to mind, just like your great aunt. That's a powerful example, way bigger than her job at Berkeley High School. That's someone who leaned into a headwind at MIT. I'm sure she faced it every day in classes, you know, probably dealing with a different grading scale, all that stuff. She's a hero. That's a hero story. And it needs to be told, you know, shared as we go forward in our lives, because this stuff tends to show up again. And it's been showing up in terms of the attitudes we face about who's entitled to be in certain positions of leadership or power or authority. So it's important to call on these examples, to be inspired by these examples, and to live them. And then to kind of keep sharing them, you know, because that's where it sticks. We don't just let it die with us. We stand up and we live this way. And we communicate that to the people we love. And I think it makes a difference. Because, as so many of you have pointed out, we matter. We matter. I'm not ultimate. I'm not saying I matter. Well, no, but we do matter. Okay, that's what it's all about. It matters how we act. It matters what we say. I saw a hand. Was there a hand here? Or... Oh, voice.
if I'm understanding what you're saying, it sounds like you see this story as stand up for what you believe is right and have that courage. Is that an accurate short summary?
Sure, especially as it pertains to being willing to take a risk for the sake of getting up.
Right.
That you're risking.
Last night I heard another interpretation of this story, and maybe you know about it. I'd like you to just make a short comment about it, but it had to do with how God works in our lives, and in this case, how God saved the Jewish people. And it comes down to looking at all the coincidences that happened along the way. Coincidences, and there's many more than what I will mention here. At least this person said. But the coincidence that here the king gives a party, he gets drunk, he gets angry at his queen, he casts her out. It opens up a place for somebody to come in. How Esther's parents dying is a coincidence that she then has to go somewhere and live. She goes and lives with Mordecai. And then how I think Mordecai encouraged her to go to the, I don't know what you would call it, the beauty contest for the queen to pick a queen, for the king to pick a queen. And how it's a consequence that she happens to be beautiful and the king picks her. And then that, anyway, all these consequences come together to show that that's how God works in our lives. And in the end, the Jewish people are saved.
My only intention with that, voice, is that to use a word like coincidence is disempowering, and it sort of removes the role that is so prominent. I look at this as a story of powerful choices, risky choices that the characters constantly make. Yes, maybe inspired by God, although as we've already said, the book doesn't mention God, but I think God is there operating behind the scenes kind of thing. But it's about the choices that are made and the risks that are taken. And God is in those choices, okay? Because to say it's all coincidence almost can allow us to say, well, you know, as life happens, we're sort of either puppets or just bystanders. And these are not bystanders. These are all agents, instruments that God uses. And that to me is how the miracles happen. That's how they happen in the Jesus stories, that there's always this relationship that Jesus builds between those being healed, made whole, and those he is doing the healing for. God is not about doing it for us. God is about doing it with us. And so that is where these choices, I think, that are made in these stories are powerful, faithful, risky choices made for the sake of love and what's right. But I still appreciate that you brought that up, because it's good to kind of play with other ways of looking at the story, for sure. Marcia.
But I think Boyce is saying, though, like her parents died. I don't know, I wouldn't call that a coincidence, but they did. But that God, I mean, it's so all is not lost for Esther, though.
Right.
God used her in bigger ways, even though she grew up parentless. So I don't know, there's something other than coincidence, but he makes good with whatever.
So many of the stories, what's the story of Jesus? I mean, it's like the lowest of the low born that you can think of. He didn't start off with a silver spoon in his mouth kind of thing. And yet what he was able to do in his faith-infused life, that sort of thing. So many of the other stories are about those who faced rough circumstances, but who ended up being called by God and became leaders for God. It happens often like that. And so what it's telling us is, don't rule ourselves out, because God will use us. Okay, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So are we ready for such a time as this? Well, we can be, as long as we're seeing, as long as we're open, as long as we're cultivating, you know, kind of trying to be ready. And it's not about saying, oh, I missed it, darn it, I screwed up, I should have stood up there. No, it's about saying, all right, well, next time, I want to be ready. That's church to me. It's not about missing our one chance. You know, oh, darn it, I failed. You know, no, too often we act like that, for sure. But church is about inspiring us to say, well, the next time, let's take a stand. Or you take a stand. Or we will help each other to take a stand. It's not just coincidence, it's just the recognition that God works through all things and creates a path where we don't see it.
I like that.
Yeah.
This the story interpretation that I heard last night, I agree with you. It removes it from us. It's not something that we can embrace ourselves. It's not saying, hey, boys, this is what you can do.
Right.
It's
saying,
oh, this is what God is doing out here, far away from you, unknownst by you. Right. And yet that came from another Bible study of another church. And I think, gee, we all are Christians walking down a path, and yet some of us are being led in one way and some of us are being led in another. And I appreciate your interpretations because it does bring it to us. It brings it home, brings it right to us. It's not just the thing that is happening around us.
Yeah, that's how God works. God isn't about trying to do it all for us. That's not how the whole scriptures aren't that. It's always God using people, and especially the unexpected people, to then lift up, the world, to serve humanity, to serve God by loving your neighbor. That's how it works. So yeah, these stories I think are very much about God working through the unexpected people. So thank you all for another rich conversation. There's so much we could continue to say about these two wonderful characters, but I think we should probably stop it for this time. And the readings for next time are in your schedules, and I'll post them online. I'm trying to get a little quicker about posting these actual videos, but I've been going to try to have them up within a few days. So thank you one and all for your openness, your participation, and until we meet again, be in peace of Christ.
Thank you, Dan.